The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Just before the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and in the temple he found people selling cattle and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting at their counters there. Making a whip out of some cord, he drove them all out of the temple, cattle and sheep as well, scattered the money changers' coins, knocked their tables over, and said to the pigeon sellers, "Take all this out of here, and stop turning my Father's house into a market." Then his disciples remembered the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will devour me." The Jews intervened and said, "What sign can you show us to justify what you have done?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this sanctuary. Are you going to raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the sanctuary that was his body. And when Jesus rose from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the Scripture and the words he had said. During his stay in Jerusalem for the Passover, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he gave. But Jesus knew them all and did not trust himself to them. He never needed evidence about any man. He could tell what a man had in him. The Gospel of the Lord. I think it's fair enough to say that most of us are a bit tired with lockdown. We know it's for the good and for the wider good of our society, but still it can feel a bit tiring. I met someone during the week while I was out for a walk, and they were expressing just how tired that they felt with the whole thing. After I'd spoken to them and I continued my walk, my mind started wandering with that thought, and I found myself thinking back to my teenage years. Now, I admit that wasn't yesterday. It was the time, as one of my nieces used to say, when everything was black and white, nothing was in colour. Well, I was reflecting, and I couldn't help but think that we had the equivalent of lockdown every week. Now, it wasn't quite as stringent, but there were a lot of similarities. You see, when I was a teenager, Sunday was a day of rest where everything was shut down. You could buy a newspaper up to lunchtime, but there were no other shops or supermarkets or places of leisure open. The routine of a Sunday for me was pretty much the same from week to week. We would get up, go to Mass, taking my granny on my dad's side with us. Then we would drop her off at my Aunt Kathy's, and then we would go to lunch at my granny's on my mother's side. After that, it was home and, well, boredom. Just think of it. No Xboxes, no Wi-Fi, only 3 television channels. At least they were in colour. Boredom. Don't talk to me about boredom. I can remember watching the raindrops going down the window for entertainment. The highlight of the day was Sunday evening, the official chart countdown on the radio, hosted by Tony Blackburn. It was a 2-hour program going through the top 40 best-selling songs of that week. It was a must. The highlight was the countdown from the top 10, culminating in this week's number 1. Reflecting on the reading from the book of Exodus, which the church proclaims to us today, I was thinking, which of the commandments is number 1? What do you think? Well, Here is my compilation of this week's countdown of the top 10 commandments as compiled by the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
And welcome to listeners on VHF who have just joined Radio 1, not only for the top 40, but for the rest of this evening. And don't forget, you can hear the nation's top chart show in super stereo on VHF. And this is Tony Blackburn with the brand new Top 40. Compiled for the BBC by the British Market Research Bureau. And in this week's chart, 6 new entries, 13 go down, 16 on the way up, and 5 non-movers.
New at number 10. You shall not covet your neighbour's house, or his servant, man or woman, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbour's. Staying at number 9 is, you shall not covet your neighbour's wife. Moving up the chart this week is number 8. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. Then at number 7 we have, you shall not steal. Staying in the same place for as long as we can remember is number 6. You shall not commit adultery. Moving down to the last 5, we have at number 5, you shall not kill. A favourite with all you parents is number 4. Honour your father and your mother so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God has given you. Keeping its third place spot for as long as we can remember is, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath for the Lord your God. At number 2, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And at this week's number 1, holding on yet again after 3,000 years is, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve. There you have it. Idolatry is the number 1 sin. What was your number 1? You know, I'm ordained over 35 years, and I can honestly say that it's never been among the top 10 sins that I have heard in confession. The other 9, yes, but I haven't heard I've been idolatrous. It's clear as we read through the Hebrew prophets that we are left with the impression that idolatry is the worst sin there is. Not getting the first commandment right means getting everything else that follows dead wrong. But seriously, how many of us give serious thought to the grave prohibition against entertaining false gods? Studies have demonstrated a modern tendency to worship movie stars, sports heroes, and music idols. It seems that many of us are drawn to adore celebrity in all its forms, even those that are notorious. Such habits lead to the creation of idolatrous society. We can be drawn to bow down before the twin gods of money and power, even risking family, health, and soul to capture an illusion that ultimately is bound to a world that is passing. A further false god that we often fall under is blind nationalism and racism. This puts the whole human family at risk in order that we may attain a narrow sense of national prosperity or security. We can see this just now in the allocation of vaccines, that many rich countries are unwilling to share their resources to ensure that everyone in the world has access to vaccines. We are mistaken to believe we can uphold the ideal of family without regard for the welfare of community. And we are deceived if we believe that national self-interest can be reached without taking into consideration what is best for the global community. When we listen to the account of the temple cleansing in today's gospel, we can focus on the violence that Jesus employs in that act. How do we reconcile the gentle Jesus who went like a lamb to the slaughter with this whip-bearing Jesus in Jerusalem? This fascination with unaccustomed rage is not confined to us. John's gospel shows more interest in the details of destruction than the other three gospels, all of which recount the event. But because relatively few gospel stories are told by all four evangelists, we know that this action is very important to the early church, critical to its self-understanding. I think we can be tempted to see this account as an attack on the unholy alliance between religion and worldly commerce. And we know how distorted leadership can get when it gets buried in the deep pockets of finance. But there's more to it than that. Jesus moves quickly to an identification with himself as the temple. If we understand the temple correctly, it's not a church building or even a grand cathedral, but it's the sole dwelling place of God on earth. Then the potentially blasphemous nature of this claim of Jesus can be appreciated. Jewish religion was firmly rooted in the idea that God dwells in the Jerusalem temple and only there. Jesus is saying, in effect, that divinity rests in his person, and that he had authority to throw everyone out of the temple because it literally was his home. When the religious leaders ask for a sign of the authority by which Jesus is laying claim to this, he predicts the resurrection. And after the resurrection, the disciples remembered, we are told, that Jesus had said this. It was for them a eureka moment. To experience the same eureka moment, we have to get rid of our other gods. To begin with, we might spend prayerful time reflecting on the masks that those gods might be wearing. Only family matters, ensuring my security, the survival of the fittest, my health, my well-being. We might list our most pressing goals and values and ask ourselves, how do these values honor or oppose the priorities that Jesus taught? We can also meditate on the image of Jesus standing alone in the temple, claiming ultimate authority in God's house. Over what portion of our lives does Jesus currently have sovereignty? And what elements of our lives do we still surrender to other gods?